Yeah, I shaved today. Good evening. What's up, everybody? This is going to be a short Q&A session. Y'all hear me over the music? I don't know. Uh, what's happening? What's up, everyone? This is going to be a short Q&A, but it's been a while, and I've been promising a Q&A some extra time this evening, so I figured I'd try to make it happen. I'm also on Instagram. I don't know if I'll be taking questions from Instagram, but since I kicked Facebook to the curb because they kept suspending me for hate crimes, I figured I'd try another property of Facebook. All right. My office is a little messy, my home office, but it's okay that my office is a little messy because I am moving to Wilmington, Delaware. So if you think my home is messy, just know that I will soon be moving to Wilmington, Delaware. It's a little dig at master teacher, professor, Dr. Demagogue. What's his name? Oh yeah, this is good. Let's try to elevate this camera. We're gonna get started. If you have any questions, the way the Q&A sessions work is if you have any questions for me, all right, I am moving to Wilmington, Delaware, so y'all can't look in my office. But I didn't pull these papers out. Actually, my wife, we have a not-for-profit here, Ecologic Outreach, where we promote ecological and sustainable practices for the post-carbon world and post-carbon economy. So she was looking for some documentation for the bank. So she pulled out a bunch of papers. I don't even know if y'all can see it. I might be snitching on myself, but I am moving to Wilmington, Delaware. So forgive the state of my office. But it's not that bad. It's a little messy. Anyway, any questions on any topics that you have, even if it's a personal question about your love life, I can help you. I can fix you. So if you have any questions, shoot. If you don't have questions, then maybe I'll just tune into the Bro Diallo show tomorrow. And if you ask me a question pertaining to tomorrow's show, just watch the show tomorrow. Also, I have an announcement. This morning, I was interviewed by the famed journalist Earl Ingram for the Earl Ingram Show. He's doing a series on. He's doing a series on Black leadership and Black politics. Let me know if the music is bothering you. But anyway, he's doing a show on Black leadership and Black politics, and he's interviewed Chairman Fred Hampton Jr., my personal inspiration for even doing talk radio, Bob Law. I remember Bob Law Night Talk, listening to that when I was a child, and now here I am trying to fill his shoes in my own way. So anyway, it's a series. He's also said he's supposed to be interviewing the likes of Farrakhan and Jesse Jackson. So I hope if you hear the Earl Ingram show, you can go to the Earl Ingram website. If the link comes up, I'll post a link to my interview and other interviews. But right now, his interview with Chairman Fred Hampton and Bob Law are up. So anyone have any questions for Bro Diallo? Yes, Dr. Umar said he's moving to Wilmington, Delaware. So, that's something we can do. Whenever you expose yourself to be a messy, whenever your stuff ain't together, your dirty laundry end up on the internet, you can just say you're moving to Wilmington, Delaware to excuse your mess. So because my office is a little messy, I don't know if y'all can see. I got some papers on the floor that are supposed to be in a file cabinet. I didn't do it. Dr. Mingo threw those papers on the floor and didn't pick. So I guess we're gonna do this mental, see who's got the strongest constitution because she put them there, so she got to pick them up. She'll probably leave them there for me. But anyway, if you think my office behind me is a little messy, it's okay because I am in the process of moving to Wilmington, Delaware. Anyway, no questions, no inquiries, no topics of discussion. Oh yeah, it's about to get cold here. But shout out to King Dita. I've been spending the last several weekends at King Dita spot cutting wood, and it was we had chainsaws, we had a spike, a wooden spike, no, a metal spike. We had an axe and a sledgehammer, and we were out there splitting wood. King Dita's neighbor cut down this big tree, and he was gracious enough to save the wood. So I got enough wood to hopefully get me through the winter. So I'm gonna be calling y'all out, Chauncey, Dita, calling y'all out to have some fireside vegan dinners in the winter. Y'all can come over here and escape the cold for some old school fireplace fireside chats. Oh, how's the shoulder? Yeah, I had injured my shoulder. I went to the doctor, and he said I might have an issue with my rotator cuff, so I got to go see a sports medicine specialist. So we'll see what comes of that. It's not that bad. I can function, but I do have limited range of motion, but not as much pain. So it is improving, but I still got to go pay the doctor and see a sports medicine specialist. But that's not till next month. But thanks for asking about my shoulder. What's up, Valencia? But other than that, I'm in good health. Blood pressure, they check your blood pressure and all your vitals when you go to the doctor just to find a reason to charge you. Everything else is good. But I think I hurt my arm clearing some high, tall grass in the garden, just whacking away using that sickle and the weed whacker. So I think I injured myself. But I'm good now. I got to make better announcements. Is that the only question just about my shoulder? Oh, and I for the first time I tried CBD oil, and I'm actually surprised. When I tried CBD oil, it worked and it was very good for me. And I even recommended it to some other people I know struggle with some issues. So I use CBD oil because my shoulder being injured would radiate up my neck and make my neck stiff, where I don't normally have issues with that. I threw some CBD oil, slapped it on my neck, and that worked primo. So I'm a pothead now. That's my first experience with deliberately consuming a marijuana or weed product. So I'm like the rest of y'all. Took me all these years. Is Magneto right? This thing is curious about Magneto. When Magneto first formed his group, he called them the Brotherhood of Evil Mutants. So, I mean, that was the name of his crew. He named his crew Evil. So, I don't think he was right. Now they've retconned that a bit, but now if I don't agree with Magneto because I suspect that he's a eugenicist and he believes in genetic superiority and genetic purity. So I don't rock with Magneto. But nah, Magneto can't be right, or else if you were good, I mean, if I formed an organization, I wouldn't call it the Brotherhood of Evil Pan-Africanist if I was right. So I have to say, in the long run, history will prove that Magneto was wrong and Professor X was right. And I know y'all edgy cats like to pretend like y'all down with Magneto because y'all want to be edge lords, uh, but I think Magneto's wrong. He's evil. He said he was evil. You don't call yourself evil if you think you're right, Carl? But again, it comes and goes. Sometimes Magneto's really popular, other times he's not. And then he obviously doesn't think he's right because look how many times he's abandoned his own cause and joined with the X-Men. And at any time he was even leading the X-Men for a short while. So even Magneto don't believe in his own right. Am I ever coming to Atlanta to do a panel discussion or lectures? I've only been to Atlanta once in my life, and I didn't get a very warm reception. the mega church slash sorority slash prosperity black capitalism achievement isn't really receptive to my analysis. So I would go if I was invited because my brother, I got some cousins, and my younger brother lives there. So I mean, I hope Atlanta holds it together, but really the overall vibe in Atlanta is kind of contrary to what I think. The thing I hate most, and Wise Intelligent is there. So I mean, if I got an invite to Atlanta, I'd go there with the quickness. But well, he's there sometimes, and other times he's not. But you know, so there's some good people in Atlanta that I care about, but I don't get invites to Atlanta. To be honest with you, I don't get a lot of my invites. I'd say a good probably 60 to 75% of my invites are to like white institutions. Black folks don't invite me out as much as white folks to give lectures or sit on panel discussion. Oddly enough, you know. But if I got an invite, I now have an invite to speak in Nigeria sometime next year. So maybe I'll have a holdover in Atlanta, but I would go to Atlanta to speak or to build, organize, whatever, do a lecture, panel discussion in Atlanta if I was invited. But I've never been invited. And the one time I was there doing some organizational work, I didn't get a very warm reception in Atlanta. So who's next? Yeah, you know, like I said, a lot of people I care about in Atlanta. Oh yeah, and then Chauncey, you just got back from the ATL, and Chauncey invited me to go to Atlanta. See, don't be exposing my lies on it. Yeah, I just had an invite to Atlanta. Sorry, Chauncey, and I was supposed to go there to do an interview in Atlanta, set up by Chauncey. But the guy who was supposed to do the interview was leaving Atlanta for Labor Day when we were supposed to be in there. So you know, cross signals. So in the future. Uh, could I invite you to the discussion group? I'm in the community movement builders, nothing big, but I would appreciate you being there. I would absolutely come. Yeah. If it's coordinated with my schedule, I'll be in Kansas City in the next couple of weeks. And then there's a anti-mass incarceration conference where I'm going there. One of my childhood friends, Ricky Kidd, one of my play cousins, our mothers were best friends. He just was released less than 2 months ago after doing more than 20 years for a crime that he didn't commit, that the prosecutor, the judge, and the entire legal and political system in Missouri knew Ricky Kidd didn't commit this murder, but yet they took away 20 years of my man's life. So he's coming to Oakland. I'm leaving from Chicago. He's coming from KC. And we'll meet in Oakland. I'm really looking forward, but I'll be in Kansas City to see him before that meeting, and maybe I can do an impromptu interview when I get there. Which Chauncey, come to Kansas City with us, Chauncey, so you can set up the AV. But anyway, or come here and show me how to do the AV before I go. All that, and then that. So, anyway, I would definitely come through. So the next question from Buck I Fan 05. What do I think of Trump's decision to fire John Bolton? I think John Bolton quit. I think Trump is the kind of guy that when you tell him you're quitting, he's going to run to the internet and say he fired you because he wants to. It's kind of like if you break up with a narcissist and they will claim they didn't want to be with you in the first place. But I think that now I had planned to talk. This is actually in my show notes for tomorrow because what we're dealing with the Trump administration is the convergence of the neocon, fascist, kleptocrats, and the overall collapse of the Project for a New American Century. I'm glad that John Bolton is not in an official position of power, but John Bolton and all those other neocons belong in a international prison or before an international court because they are literally directly responsible for the deaths of millions of people in their project for a new American century from dating from 9/11 up till now. So I think that I'm glad John Bolton is gone, but you know I'm with the impeach the motherfucker. I believe that Trump should be impeached, but I also believe Obama should be indicted. So he's one. I think he will reemerge because you know just a few weeks before John Bolton's exit, not even weeks, earlier the year, Mad Dog Mattis left the Trump administration and he went to sit on a board for a major military contractor. So he'll be making seven figures a year off of the strength. So I'm pretty sure John Bolton is going to land at the Council of Foreign Relations, or he's going to have a fellowship at the Heritage Foundation, or he's going to be on the seat or head up the what they call the Americans for Progress, or he might show up at the NRA. So those parasitic fascist white men, they never retire. He's just going to go into either the private sector or the right-wing not-for-profit sector and continue to do harm. So I don't really celebrate his exit. I'm glad I don't have to look at his stupid ass mustache, scum of the earth. Those men should not be fired. They should be arrested, indicted, prosecuted, and incarcerated. So it's nothing to celebrate. And for every parasitic white warmonger that falls off, 10 more emerge from West Point or from Harvard and MIT. So they got factories to churn out these omnicidal scumbags. So it's a whole bunch of nothing. It's theatrics. I'll talk about Christian Zionists and their desire for the apocalypse. Yes. Well, that's the rest of the evening, man. If you don't know, if you don't understand, because I get a lot of black people that complain about how much money America gives Israel. But what Christian Zionists believe in this thing called dispensation. And dispensation is basically a prophecy that's not actually articulated in the Bible. This prophecy came long after, it's not even a biblical prophecy, but they believe that before Jesus can come back, the second coming of the Christ, the synagogue has to be built on the Temple Mount. But right now, the Al Aqsa Mosque is there, so they have to tear down that mosque, build another temple. That temple has to be destroyed, and then the Jews will either be eradicated by their enemies or convert to Christian and become what they call what's the word for the Christian Judaic Messianic Jews, and they will have to convert to Islam. It's a crazy idea, but white Christians, fascists or American fascists. The book American Fascists by Chris Hedges lays this out because it's a lot. But basically, the right wing Christian community in the United States believe that the nation of Israel is the establishment of the nation of Israel is one of the seven seals or one of the dispensations that is necessary for Christ to return. And they give Israel all of this money and they protect Israel and their many atrocities in the that they commit. They protect them from facing any consequences in the UN because they believe that Israel must fully reestablish its nation and rebuild the dome on the Temple Rock. And then the Jews must be destroyed. So even though they're Christian Zionists and they do everything to support the Zionists, they are supporting the Zionists, basically literally trying to give the Zionists or the Jews in Israel enough rope to hang themselves. Because one part of the prophecy is establishment of Israel, rebuilding of the synagogue, and then the utter destruction of Israel will be the final sign that Jesus will return, not as a lamb, but as a lion to bring about God's retribution. So that is one of the reasons why there is so much questioning, unmitigated support for the nation of Israel and Zionists in the United States, while billions of dollars and all sorts of weapons, even though Israel has frequently caught spying on the United States, subverting the United States, selling weapons and technology illegally to the United States enemies. And so Israel is not a very good ally, but the Christian Zionists, the right-wing Christian elements in this country have this crazy idea that is really could lead to nuclear holocaust. And I don't know what's going to come first if we leave white people in charge, a nuclear holocaust or an ecological collapse. But I hope that explains it. But it's really crazy. But there's a lot of good writings and there's some good lectures on it online as well. Kwame Ture was very invested in his opposition to Israel and the Zionist project or the Greater Israel Project. There's another scholar and journalist named Max Blumenthal who also talks about this in great extent and writes about this. He blogs, Chris Hedges. but it's really an interesting thing. I might have to do a whole show on Zionism, and which is, it's funny because the Zionists are secular. Theodor Herzl, the father of Zionism, and the Zionist leaders, they're secular. Many of them are atheists, and their support base in the United States is religious. It makes no sense, but it's deadly. It's a very deadly alliance. Uh, how can I hook up with you when you come to Oakland? At me, go to Diallo Kenyatta. You can meet me at the conference or go inbox me at Diallo Kenyatta, or go to my Facebook page and you can messenger me there and I can give you my info. I'll just be in Oakland on them zip scooters y'all have. That's all I did last time I was in Oakland last year. I just zipped all around between my hotel and Whole Foods. So I'll definitely be there. I'm definitely an accessible person. So just at me on social media, and then we can hook up, get some lunch on the scooters. We'll eat lunch on the scooters. I love those scooters in Oakland. Well, we got them here now, but I never ride them here. If I'm gonna injure or kill myself, I'd rather be out of town when I do it. Okay, three things, Chauncey. Three things specifically demand for reparations: land, untaxed income for a length of enslavement, free education for all those generations. Um, yeah, that's good. I take it if they were offering it, but that's not actually reparations, because if you look up the definition of reparations literally means to restore people to the status that they were prior to the crime committed. That's what reparations is. So, since the crime that was committed to us was loss of sovereignty, true reparations would be repatriation to Africa and the restoration and full decolonization of Africa. You can't give African people reparations by just isolating Black people who have a U.S. citizenship or Black people who were enslaved in the United States. Also, if you look at the economics and geography of the slave route, many Africans who were enslaved in the United States were sold in blocks to the Caribbean and Guyana and Brazil. Many Africans who were enslaved in the United States fled the United States during the Civil War and the Revolutionary War and ended up in places like Nova Scotia. African enslavement was a worldwide system. And if Black reparations is limited to a certain geography, if it's limited in scope, it will be limited in its effect. So we need a global reparation system, a holistic Pan-African reparation system. But the things that you asked for in terms of land, the land's contaminated. If we get land and the capitalist system of production and extraction goes on, and carbon emissions continue, and carbon concentration in the atmosphere continues to increase, it's going to be dead land. It's all over Missouri. The breadbasket of America is having record shortfalls in terms of the wheat and corn and other monoculture crops, because the climate is no longer viable for us. So we're going to have land that we can't grow on, or land that's going to be underwater, or land that's going to be burnt up by forest fires, or land that's going to be hit by hurricanes, or land, if it's inland, land that's torn up by tornadoes. So what is land on a dying planet? In terms of untaxed income, a large percentage of Black people don't pay taxes because we aren't in a high enough income bracket to pay taxes. So that will only benefit the middle class. The vast majority of poor Black people, untaxed income really doesn't mean anything to us, because you have to earn a certain amount to even be eligible to pay federal income tax. And because reparations is a federal nationwide program, we still will be subjected to state and city taxes, where most poor Black people actually pay. And as far as free education, again, who's printing the books? Who's standing in front of the chalkboard giving the instructions? We knew 100 years ago as what did he say? I don't remember his name, but the first Black man to graduate from Harvard said Harvard has ruined more Negroes than bad whiskey. We already got a fuck ton of Black folks coming out of these institutions of higher learning. And what do? They go work for Jay-Z and manage Jay-Z's income. So I'm not against any of those things. Get your land, get your untaxed income, get your free education, but for what end? To give us a level of comfort and opportunity within the system, or to give us liberation? So I ain't trying to shoot it down, Chauncey. I know the next time you see me, we can discuss it further. But my take on reparations is it's not like everybody else. I'm not that optimistic about the outcome. I think reparations will play out much like affirmative action and other set asides and concessions that the society made in the 60s and 70s. Integration, busing, set asides, quotas. All right. TC, I just finished The Myth of Black Capitalism. Afari mentions 1938 and the shy half the businesses in the hood, only 1/10 of black consumers' money went to blacks. Uh, Half the businesses in the hood were black, but on. Yeah, you're right, TC. We have a an idealized past because a lot of times black folks say things were better when we were segregated. That's not really true. Um, Black people, we've always, especially in the cities, if you go outside the cities, you find more cohesion. I mean, I grew up in Missouri and there was more cohesion. We had less power and less status, but we had more cohesion. When I moved to places like Chicago and New York, black people got more status, more resources, but they don't have the cohesion. So it's kind of like a give and take. But yeah, you're right. Even in the good old days of segregation, um, we still had these same issues but we can't do capitalism. And capitalism, like I said, the book is a myth about capitalism, and we've never succeeded because of capitalism. Black people have always elevated in spite or in opposition to capitalism. But you didn't really ask the question, but yeah, that's an accurate comment. Chauncey, you asked, is STEM, science, technology, engineering, and math learning a good thing? No, STEM alone is not a good thing. You need STEAM. You need the arts and philosophy. Because what STEAM does is create what is called automatons. An automaton is a highly skilled individual who really doesn't have any philosophical, ideological, or ethical standing. So a lot of scientists will go out and create what is called ethno-specific pandemics. They create drone bombs and cluster bombs. They create surveillance systems, and they have no moral compunction. So when you look at educating an individual, if you create a highly skilled individual, but you don't teach them about the philosophies, you don't teach them ethics, you don't teach them critical thinking, you simply give them tools and materials and they create all these wonderful technological instruments, but there is no real morality behind it. They're going to create instruments of warfare, death, distraction, surveillance, bondage. So I do not want my child to simply have a technological education so that he becomes an automaton. I want my child to know about poetry. I want my child to know about philosophy. I want my child to be able to look at a African art or Renaissance art and be able to contemplate the unseen, the unknown. So I want my child to know ethics and morality and logic and reason. I don't just want them to be automatons. And if you look at the people who are pushing STEAM, like Bill Gates, the very people that push STEAM, the elite, they give their children what is called a liberal arts education. If you look at all the elite schools, they have the liberal arts education. White elites have always thought that high-minded things like government, civics, I want my child to know civics, which doesn't fit into the STEM curriculum. I want them to understand the workings of power. Oh, you don't need to know. You just need to know how to do labor. You need to know how to create an iPhone and operate an iPhone. You need to know how to create weapon systems and operate weapon systems. You need to know how to create a sewage system and operate a sewage system. But as far as governance, taxation, policy, constitution, philosophy, you don't need to know any of that. Leave that to the high-minded elites. So I think STEM is another hustle. And they were like, if you learn STEM, you'll get a good job. But that's another hustle because everybody goes to STEM. And then capitalism is all about scarcity. Right now, every year, China trains millions of engineers who will work for a bowl of rice. And in India right now, they train hundreds of thousands of coders and programmers. And then at the same time, they tell us to learn STEM. They're talking about we're going to globalize the economy. So you got to compete with all these other educated people from all over the world who have a lower standard of living and lower income requirements and lower material expectations. So even then, even if you learn architectures, like, well, we're going to pay a U.S. architect, or we're going to have send our specs overseas and have a Vietnamese architect do up our drawings and do it and send it back to us. So STEM is another hustle. So if it ain't revolutionary STEM, if it ain't specifically teaching people the technology of revolution and subverting the systems of capitalism, we really just fall into another trick. You know, what's an educated slave but a more efficient, more technological slave? You know, and then another thing, I was just reading earlier today about the cotton gin. Remember slavery, they said at a time slavery was on a downslope. But then they invented this new technology that made cotton growing more profitable because they had a machine instead of by hand. They were able to separate the cloth and weave, and the textile industry boomed. And so chattel slavery that was on a decline after, due to technological advances, the oppression ballooned and went skyrocketed. So there's nothing inherently liberating about technology. Technology can be oppressive, but technology is really neutral. So what makes technology good or bad is the people's consciousness. And where do you get consciousness in STEAM? You literally in this country can get a PhD in computer programming and computer science and not to have to take 1 credit hour of ethics. When I went, because medical science has been around a lot longer than computer science. So when I wanted to go and be a radiographer, I went to school to get a 2-year degree to be a radiographer. And I had to take 2 full semesters of ethics. They say, well, you're going to be working with these, and people are going to be literally trusting their lives. We had different ideas about healing, wellness, and disease and approaches to death. We had to understand the human component. We couldn't just be engaged with the technology. But now the modern STEM is taking that out of it. You know, you want your programmer, coder, technician, engineer to think about the societal, historical implications of their technological work. And they can't do that if they've only learned STEAM all their damn life. They've been moving numbers and images on screens their whole life and never sat back to contemplate, to philosophize. So I'm not a fan of STEAM. I'm not a fan of compartmentalizing education. I believe every child's education should be as broad as possible. They should know tech, they should know philosophy, they should engage in the arts, and they should just have time to sit down and imagine and daydream and play and run in the dirt. I'm for a holistic education, not STEM education. I'm sorry, I went a little far on that. All right, does that fact negate the notion many assert that Black people used to mostly patron Black businesses before integration? I feel like I'm hearing a contradiction in information. Well, I talked about this before. During the era of segregation, Black unity was a default. So, you know, when Sammy Davis Jr., who was one of the most popular performers of his era, was a young man, when he'd come to town, he couldn't stay in the white hotel, so he'd stay in the Black hotels. So even though Black people did mostly patronize Black business, even though by default we were required to give a certain level of our business and take access. There was times where white doctors wouldn't treat Black patients. There, you know, wasn't no white man going to do no Black man's laundry or seamstress. And you also have to know that during the time of Jim Crow, a lot of Black businesses weren't on paper. You know about the juke joints and the boarding houses. So there was a lot of money changing hands amongst Black folks that white folks didn't know about, that white folks didn't tax. Numbers running and things of that nature. And a lot of Black people, even though we had an abundance of business. So yes, there was more patronizing of Black businesses, some of it, but it wasn't really because we were so pro-Black during it. It's because we didn't have the option of going to white folks' business, you know. So that is one part of it. So yeah, yes and no. But white people have always been parasitic and have always forced themselves into our market. So you couldn't really say no to the white or Jewish merchant or the white or Jewish slumlord or the white and Jewish manufacturer who wanted to set up a factory or something. So black people a lot of times didn't, just like now, didn't really have the option of going black. Because if a black man created a successful business and a white man saw a black man making money, he would just come run the black man out of business and set up his own business. And then the black man who used to run it up front had to go underground with his. So it's not really a contradiction. Yeah, there was more black on black patronizing, but that's because there was a lot of forbidden economic activities or a lot of services white people just would not provide to blacks. But then there was also that inferiority complex. So when white people were willing to sell to us, we were very enthusiastic because we thought it was a sign of elevation, just like we do now. So it's not really a contradiction, but but I do think we do idolize pre-integration, unity, and all of that. I've noticed on my Twitter feed that brothers and sisters are getting into anarchism. What is your opinion? Are the pros and cons of anarchism? Um, I don't think anarchism is for black people. I celebrate anarchism amongst white people, but black people, we are oppressed. So anarchism is basically when you remove any hierarchies, and what they want is free association and cooperation. We cannot do anarchy because we don't have any archy. There's no hierarchy amongst us. We don't run shit. So it's kind of stupid for black people to talk about anarchy. It's something we can wish for, but it's nothing we're in a position to create. Because ironically, in order to institute anarchy, you need a little archy. Archy, a hierarchy, archy is power. You need power to create a system. So we have to be able to create a system, operate a system before we can determine that we don't want the system anymore. So for white people to say, listen, our systems of power, of rule, of resource extraction is wrong, and we should dismantle it, it's good for white people. But what generally happens when you implement all the times that anarchy is implemented, it creates a power vacuum. That's what it generally does. It doesn't eliminate power. It just creates a power vacuum. And people think the absence of power means that we're equal. So I don't think anarchy is viable. But what Marx also said is that you can't really, that anarchy will be a byproduct of the proper distribution of resources. You can't really create anarchy. Anarchy comes about as you have more equitable distribution of resources, then the hierarchies will dissolve on their own. You don't really have to say in the hierarchies, they will dissolve if you get on a material basis. So I would be more akin to that. I am at heart an anarchist, but that's a fantasy. Black people, we need hierarchies, we need structures, we need bureaucracy, we need to engage in statecraft because the institutions that oppress us are just that, institutions. And to fight institutions, you need counter institutions and counter infrastructure. So I support black bureaucracy, black structure, black revolutionary hierarchies, vanguard, rear guard, and overall revolutionary structures and command systems. We need it. White people, they don't need that. They need to tear down their power structure. We need to build ours up. And if they are successful at creating anarchy amongst Europeans, I totally applaud that. But it's really stupid for black people to go along. Their problems aren't our problems. Their mission is not our mission. Their obligations are not our obligations. So anarchy for whites, black power for blacks. And then when white power comes down and the world rebalances, then we can have the anarchy conversation. So ultimately, David, I would say that it's premature for black people to talk about anarchism, and it is a waste of time for white folks to talk about it because all white people have to do, the white anarchists have to do, is redistribute the resources, and the hierarchies will dissolve on their own. But it's something. It's a good idea, but the conditions to create it aren't with us. Jews are not a race, and if you let them run that hustle, he says, for all intents and purposes, Jews are a race and Jews are not a religion. Judaism is a religion. Judaism can also form into an ethnic group. There is no such thing as the Jewish race. There is no phenotype for Jews. There is no reproductive Jews. It's a matriarchal religion. Therefore, if a Jewish man goes and has a child with a Muslim or a Christian woman, that offspring is not Jewish, because it's a matrilineal down uh, succession. So you can have Jewish heritage or you can have Jewish lineage, but you don't have Jewish DNA. You don't have Jewish phenotype. But they want to push it that way. And that's why even if you go to Israel, the homeland of the Jews, I tomorrow could go to rabbinical school, convert to Judaism, and have the approval of a rabbi, and that I have converted to Judaism. And tomorrow, after all that, the next day I could be living in Israel with full citizenship as a Jew and recognized as a Jew. And I know many Black people that have done that. In fact, if you go to the Bro Diallo archives, there is a Black woman born in the United States, like in Detroit or Chicago, and from around the way, her husband is like from Texas somewhere. They were born Christian, barefoot Baptists, and they converted to Judaism, and they're living with full citizenship in Israel and fully recognized as Jew. And they look just like Mose and Mosetta. So if you want to run that hustle that Jews are a race, then go ahead. You didn't fall for the okie doke. I've heard about the family documentary. I haven't seen it yet. I'll try to watch it when I get a chance. Okay, I have a question. I watched your interesting series about revolutionary versus reactionary violence. Doesn't the presence of reactionary violence within the community necessitate a certain respect? In one way, respect means to look again. Re means over, continue. Spec means to see. You should respect everything, meaning that you looked at everything in depth and you see everything for what it is. In the other context of respect, meaning venerate, to honor, to have, cherish, no. We should have no respect in that context for reactionary violence, but we should understand, study, and confront reactionary violence. And in fact, we should do what we can to undermine or discourage reactionary violence in the Black community. In the case, the police will constrain and even poorly effectively protect the community. Oh, for the forces, in this case, the police that will constrain and even poorly or effectively protect the community. It is a myth that the reactionary violence, like the gangbangers and other criminal elements in our community, have ever protected us from the police. Even when they do battle with the police, it's more so that they're fighting to open up space and opportunity for further predation against other Black people. So no, I don't. Well, there are some instances of reactionary violence. Like I said, we can respect, we can understand it. And that violence is called maximum emergency compensatory violence. And I do respect that. I understand it. But I think we would be better off if we could do revolutionary violence. And I don't think that reactionary violence is a substitute for revolutionary violence. So I respect it in terms of we should understand it. But our main goal is studying reactionary violence is to try to say, how do we get individuals or groups that engage in reactionary violence to educate, to reorient them to engage in revolutionary violence? How do we revolutionize reactionary violence? That should be our goal. Are you going to read Amos Wilson, Black on Black Violence? Yeah, I've read it a couple of times. Speak of the devil. I got it right here. I'm actually rereading the book. So I got Black on Black Violence right here. But yeah, I would like to do a public reading. I'm actually going to organize. And winter is coming. We're going to be shut in. I'm going to organize a reading of the entire Amos Wilson library, starting with falsification of African consciousness and go all the way down his entire African World Info Systems library. So be on the lookout for that. Chauncey, we got to do that. Science is necessary, specialization important, organization feature, blah. Aspect. I didn't say science was unnecessary, but science without ethics is oppressive. Science without ethics will harm a people more than it will help a people. So science is a necessity, but just because one thing is a necessity, when you go after one, that's like saying, I eat only protein, but I eat no fiber. You're going to get colon cancer. You need protein and fiber. Why do we always have to sectionalize and compartmentalize things? Yes, science is necessary. My point was not that science is unnecessary. My point was, so are the humanities, and liberal arts are just as necessary as science. You don't want an unethical science. You don't want unethical programmers and coders. You don't want unethical automatons. Damn. Okay. Do you know any other brothers who are as rational in terms of thinking as you are? Yeah. Chauncey's on here. Yeah, I know several brothers that are rational. In fact, those are the only kind of brothers I can really hang with, because I try to build with irrational brothers, and they don't kick it with me too tough. So yeah, I know plenty of brothers and sisters that are rational. Some of us sister want conscious brothers, but some of us are sick, and these mommy him. Oh, you want for that? I don't. Well, most of the brothers I know, I'm old, so I don't know no single cats. When I was young and single, I knew a lot of young single cats, but I don't know if you've ever been. But you know how you get in a relationship and single people don't hang with you. I think Chauncey's single. I don't know, but my wife she tries to hook people up all the time. But now, do you ask me, do I know any single rational brothers? I know a couple, but I don't like trying to introduce people like that, because then they want you to be invested in a relationship. Like, oh, you brought us together. Can you be at our wedding? I stay out of folks' personal business. I like to tell you your business, but I don't want to be a part of it. I just want to tell you how to live your life and then have you go away and live. Anyway, but I'll start keeping an eye out. I'll start keeping an eye out for y'all and the other rationalist brothers. But we get snatched up kind of early. Women be trapping us. My wife, I was still in my 20s when my wife trapped me with 2 kids. Got me locked here doing this domestic stuff. Right. Okay. So at your institution, professional ethics and basic philosophy course. That's all I'm saying. I don't ask too much. And I think liberals, I think people who take liberal arts should take sciences. I think political science, I think people who study political science, or what's called the soft science, people who study philosophy should understand technology and should understand the science. You know, I don't think that one is better than the other. I think we have the capacity to understand the esoteric, the material, the technological, the philosophical. Our minds have the capacity to do all of that. I don't know why we would shut ourselves off from one versus the other. Yeah, I've read some books about black people so-called selling each other into slavery, but it's like that's like saying Indians sold their land to the white man. You can't really call, like, if somebody came up to me with a gun and said, "Hey, sell me your shirt," and they got a gun to my head. I go to the police and it's like, well, he put a gun to my head and said, "Sell me your shirt." I gave my shirt, he gave me $1. They would still arrest that person because it was done under duress. So, but yeah, there are some books. But no, it wasn't African slavery. I actually have a book on this shelf. I had one. African. There's a book by a white man, because I mean, Africans been telling us about Africans. Professor William Mackley, Dr. Clark, all said Africans didn't sell at each other, but we don't. Obviously, we're not listening to them because we're still having that debate. I was just rearranging this bookshelf. It's called a book called Africans and the Making of the Mediterranean by a white historian. And he said that Europeans documented that they called African slavery in name only. What I'm telling you is when Europeans came to Africa, they saw things they never saw before. And when you see something you never seen before, you don't have the vocabulary to describe it. So if we got on a rocket ship and went to Mars and there were Martians there engaged in activities that we'd never seen before, all we have are our own vocabulary. So when they saw people in relationships, the only way they understood relationships as European is dominant and subordinate, oppressor and oppressed, slave and master. So when they saw these relationships, they tried to rationalize, well, this must be the chiefs. There were no damn chiefs in Africa. Even the concepts of tribes. Most tribes were identified and defined according to Europeans. Africans didn't call themselves tribes. That wasn't an African word. There was no such thing as Nigeria or the Congo. So when they come there and say, well, we saw slavery, we saw voodoo, or we saw them worshiping animals, and we saw that, they didn't know what the blood clot they were talking about. So then they started saying, yeah, we call that slavery, but it's slavery in name only because it has none of the characteristics of slavery as we know it. But we don't have any word to define those relationships. And then when they enslaved us, they literally for over 300 years forbade us to research, study, or even speak our mother tongues or play our mother drums. So we lost the vocabulary to define those things. So here we are running around debating about African slavery when there was no African slavery. There was a European misinterpretation of African relationships, however they were. Where I have to find that book. I just was looking at it. I don't see it. I was gonna pull that book out. Maybe I took it upstairs. But I was gonna take it out and read that passage. Oh, there it is. Hold on. Wolande. Here's the book right here by John Thornton. Here's a white man. This is the book. Africa and the Africans in the Making of the Atlantic World, 1400 to 1800. He talks about Europeans' first interactions with Africans. Did I even highlight it? Damn it, because I mean, even the white man is now saying, yeah, Africans didn't have each other's slaves. Arabs brought that slavery to Africa. Now, Egyptians didn't have a slave system. Egyptians didn't use slaves, Jewish or otherwise, to build the pyramids. Scholars recently have most often unequal Europeans reaping most of the long range benefit. But this, like I said, this is I have to find it. I don't want to take up y'all time. But I mean, most respected scholars, and much of that, oh, Africans already had slaves. Most of that rhetoric was they do that to justify it. It's like when a rapist say a woman wanted it or the woman was wanted the sex. That's what all liars and rapists do. They come and claim that you were engaged in the activity that they imposed on you. But this guy, most of his research is rooted in the logs that the enslavers had. Here's one part. Slavery and African social structure, chapter 3. He says here, the sale of slaves must therefore have been harmful to Africa, and the African decisions to sell slaves must have been forced or involuntary for one or more reasons. So Africans who sold each other into slavery did so under duress. And if I kicked in your door tonight and said, hey, I got a guy outside that wants to buy your TV, and you sell it to him or I'm going to kill you. And then you go to the police and say, oh, this guy has my TV. And he paid you for it. Yeah, but I didn't want the money. I wanted my TV. But this other guy told me he would kill me. Oh, well, you sold your own TV. That's not how economics force. I might get a tattoo. And see, they said slavery was rampant, but they also said there were no system of private property in Africa or revenue producing property. What does it say? Where does it say? The Atlantic slave throughout trade outgrowth internal societies gave slavery different meanings. Oh, here it is. One of it. The structure of African society gave slavery a different meaning than it had in Europe or the colonial America. There was none of the characteristics: whipping, ownership, refusal to educate, selling and breaking up of families. Oh, here it is. Okay, you get this book. It's on page 87. Africa and the Africans in the Making of the Atlantic World. John Thornton. You have to have the second edition. If so, I don't know what page it is on the other editions. But on page 87, a slave trader, one of an Italian slaver, Giacinto Bergotti da Varala, the nobleman, describes slaves in Central Africa as slaves in name only by virtue of their relative freedom and wide variety of employment which they were put. They came there and saw African laborers. And in Europe, during the early stages of the European Renaissance and the age of exploration, they saw that Africans who were doing labor were serfs or peasants. In Europe, no only free men in Europe were the noblemen and the lords. All of the peasants and serfs in Europe belonged to the noblemen and the lord. They had no rights, they had no mobility. They even had this thing called prima nocta, where if you married a serf or a peasant woman, the lord or the governor of your or the king of your nation could come and have the first night with your wife. Your human rights were not even acknowledged, let alone respected in Europe. So when Europeans came to Africa and saw African labor, they saw Africans doing the work, and then they saw elders and council members who were respected elders who would advise the people. They were like, you must be the ruler. That man was not the ruler. He didn't have the right, like a European king, to cut somebody's head off. He didn't have the rights and the power of a European king. He was a man that the people of the community respected and venerated because he had gone through the rites of passage. He held the knowledge of the people as a griot, and so they would go to him for counsel. But they were like, that's the king, that's the ruler, that's the chief. And then they'd see a man, a blacksmith or a fisherman or some other laborer, and they were like, he must be a slave, and that's a king. And they went there and imposed European titles that for conditions that they did never existed. So you go to the third chapter, and the entire third chapter where he talks about slave in Africa, and even this white man did everything in his power to try to say, yeah, there was slavery in Africa. There's only slavery in Africa because the Europeans did not have the vocabulary or the intelligence to actually describe what they had experienced in Africa. Can we stop with this debate now? Because like I said, Dr. Clark told us we didn't listen. Dr. Ben told us, John G. Jackson told us, Chancellor Williams told us, we don't listen. Marimba Ani told us we don't listen. Now I found a white man who will tell it. And I'm pretty sure if I read more white historians, which I don't read very many white historians on African history. I read a lot of white historians on white history. It takes one to know one. It's enough African historians. Before I spend money on a white man's book about Africa, I go get an African man's book about Africa. But for the few white historians that I have, from Howard Zinn to John Thornton, the truth is out. They've been demonizing us for too long, and we don't need to spread that around. I'm going to be talking about Tanzania tomorrow, the so-called xenophobia, and tomorrow. So tune into the Bro Diallo show. Am I going to get a tat? I got a homie that does tats in Kansas City, and I told him I might give me a tat when I get to Kansas City. I'm starting to have second thoughts now because my wife and everybody else is player hating. I don't have any tattoos or piercing. And then when I try to join the cool kids, everybody want to hate. So maybe I still say I am getting a tat, a modest little tat, something minor, maybe an adinkra symbol. Who knows? My son's names or something. Oh, that's corny. I ain't putting their names on. They should put my name upon them. Books for Black mental health. Shoot. That's a good question. I'll have to compile a Black mental health reading list. because there are some out there. I think black skin, white mask. Well, a lot of time, well, yeah, Fanon writes about mental health. Wretched of the Earth, I think, is good. Mimi, Pedagogy of the Oppressed, you know. But yeah, I will have to do more to for for a more comprehensive list. That's a good um, thing. I'll work on putting together a black mental health book list. Talk about the African ruling elite and their relentless drive to acquire the trinkets of Arthur says talk about the how the African ruling elite had a relentless drive to acquire the trinkets of Europeans offered. Well, there's something you got to understand about that, because you're right. African ruling elites do have a drive for the trinkets. But this is a chicken or egg scenario. What came first, the chicken or the egg? African ruling elite did not initially or inherently have a drive to get European trinkets. What happened was the Europeans, dating back as far as the Arab incursions back in the 7th century, all the way back to the 7th century, from the Arab Islamic invasions to later European invasions. What happened when there were principled African elites, African leaders who wanted nothing to do with European trinkets or Arab religions? They were assassinated or displaced. And so those individuals who want the European trinkets are handpicked by Europeans. So that's not a natural phenomenon that black leaders betray the people. That's not an inherent phenomenon. So we shouldn't just hate black leadership blanket, you know. And there's a difference between being a black leader and a white representative. We have a lot of white representatives who parade around as black leaders. You're not a black leader if you don't represent the interests and agendas of black people. Even if you are in a leadership position like Barack Hussein Obama or Jay-Z, even if we need to stop calling these people black leaders and call them white representatives, because they are amongst black people to represent the interests of whites. Like the first black leaders in America were the black preachers, and the black preachers came to the black community. They were our first formal leaders. That's why in America to this day, most of our leaders are reverend minister type religious cats, because that goes all the way back to slavery, because we didn't have scholars during slavery. We didn't have statesmen during slavery. We didn't have soldiers during slavery or generals. Only official title a black man could have under slavery was minister, reverend, depending on if you were enslaved by a Calvinist or enslaved by any other Protestant sect, or your master was a Catholic. Depending on what your master's religious orientation was, they would allow a slave to take on a title of authority to teach the flock to be submissive to thy master, to serve the master as the master serves the Lord on high. So, yes, these black leaders, I would like, because I do this myself, call these black leaders. Start calling these black leaders white representatives. You have Killer Mike. Killer Mike comes to the black people and says, let's manufacture Coca-Cola. Let's have Crips and Bloods make Coca-Cola. And let's open up banks. And let's learn how to fish. And we can't do revolution. Black people don't talk about revolution. Let's fish. Learn how to fish and garden, and because we can't do revolution. He's not speaking to our interests or desires. He's not advancing our agendas. He's speaking on behalf of white folks. Because if I went to white folks right now, I wouldn't be telling white folks to do anything but what's in the interest of black folks. If I was elected president, or if they call me to Harvard to give a lecture, when I go to speak to white folks, I tell white folks what's best for us, because I represent my people and my people's interest. So if you are black and you're among black people telling black people to do things that will only benefit white folks, you're not a black leader, you're a white representative. You're among us to represent white folks' interest. So though, let's start calling these so-called black leaders or Black Agenda Report calls them Black misleadership. The Black misleadership class. That's another misleadership. But I'm gonna start calling them white representative. You're not a black leader, you're a white representative. You want to make us white. You want to integrate us with white people. You want us to be capitalist. You want us to be Christian, Muslim, some alien slavery religion. You ain't down for us. That's my recommendation. Last question. Let me see. Chris, that's a good question. Man, I don't have time to answer that question properly. My favorite candidate was Jay Inslee, but he's out of the race, so I got to pick one of them other crackers to vote for. Because I sure ain't voting for Cory Booker or Kamala, so I got to vote for somebody white. So, but Jay Inslee was my guy. Oh, there's an Asian guy in there too, but I think he's a clown. So, but if I had to vote right now, probably be Bernie. That's what I voted for in the primary. And then I voted for Jill Stein after that. But anyway, okay, that'll be my last question. There's some really good questions on here. What we should fight for in the political establishment. I think black people, in terms of our voting, our number one priority in voting should be ecology and sustainability. We should throw our votes behind any candidate that is going to honestly address climate change and carbon emissions. That's more important than anything. Black reparations, Pan African. The number one most important issue facing humanity now is climate change. And outside the political arena, what we should fight for, we need to fight to revolutionize our people. We got to radicalize and revolutionize our people. Middle of high school, but that's it. It's late, and my tea's almost done. I can't talk to y'all without my tea, my turmeric tea. This turmeric tea is for my shoulder. But anyway, that's it. My tea is done. My music about to run out. I appreciate y'all for this Q&A session. I'm going to try to do them more consistent. I really appreciate everyone took time to watch, ask questions. Bro Diallo, DialloKenyatta.com. You can throw a few pennies at my Patreon if you can to help sustain the Bro Diallo show and my other efforts tonight. And y'all have a great Wednesday. I think tomorrow is Independence Day for Guinea-Bissau. So happy to Guinea-Bissau. And excuse me. Y'all have a good night.